Good afternoon. It's 5 o'clock UK time, and welcome to this week's What Comes Next Live. I think we're on episode 102 or 3. I haven't checked lately. I am really pleased this week that my guest is Dr. Carrie Goucher. Carrie and I have been friends for quite a long time, though we've not actually spoken for quite some time, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what has been going on, what has she learned, what's she now a doctor in? Well, I know the answer to that, but I'm sure she can explain. And what she might feel is coming next down the line. And I am, as I normally am, coming to you from south of London. And if I wave to the north, Carrie is up in Cambridgeshire somewhere, I believe, where she's been based for a number of years. Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you, Tom. Absolutely delighted to be here.
Cool. So tell us a little bit about what you moved to Cambridge a number of years ago. I think about 5-6 years ago, we were punting on the Cam on one autumn. And what took you to Cambridge, what you've been doing there, and what you got your doctorate in, and what you're up to now.
Well, I'd always been interested, as you know, in how we work at work. So I have a shelf bristling with books that explore that theme. I had an agency for 17 years that helped large organizations engage with and spark action with their employees. And what I came to realize is there's a huge amount of friction in the way of every employee, from email to decision making to meetings. And the more I waded into the world of trying to help organizations have an adult to adult relationship with their employees, so everyone is responsible for moving the organization forward, the more I realized that we've got to take some of that friction out of the way. So I started working on meetings. That was something some clients specifically asked me to do. And as I did that, it caught the eye of somebody weirdly in the engineering department at Cambridge University. So I went to talk to them. They offered me a conversation about doing a PhD. I drove there thinking, they really don't want me to do a PhD. I start everything, I can't finish anything, I'm not very detailed, I was really late, and I thought it doesn't matter because they're not going to want me and I don't want to do it. Well, anyway, 4 years later, I did do it, and it was one of the most joyful, enriching experiences I could ever have imagined having in my very late 30s.
Well, what made it so?
I had this idea that Cambridge University would be full of people, very bright people, who wanted to tell you how clever they were and who wanted to kind of give you a beating if they were your tutor or your supervisor on a regular basis. I found it full of people who were open, curious, supportive, encouraging, creative. People would come by my desk. So the first day I got there, so I didn't tell my supervisor this, but I did continue running my business throughout. And the first day I got there, just to kind of show up and show my face and say, I'm ready to start, they said, here's your desk. And there was this big desk and it said, Caroline Bedingfield, as my name was then, at the top. And I was like, you want me to sit there for 3 years? Having, worked wherever I wanted. So I did sit there some of the time. But what I found is that people would stop, incredibly clever, bright people would stop by my desk and say, what did you just draw? And, oh, that looks interesting. And can you tell me what your data shows? People were so interested and curious and took me seriously, which was wonderful. And I felt I had the freedom and the skills and the tools, I was provided with the development to develop the skills to look at something through a fresh angle. And I discovered a world I could never have imagined.
So tell me a bit about that world you discovered.
Well, I guess everybody thinks a PhD is a big research project, and that your PhD is to find out something really clever. And ideally that's the outcome, but really it's your L plate research project. What you're really doing is a degree in research studies. And, what you learn is how we know what we know and what is knowledge. And I guess they were two levels of thinking that I had never even really explored before. So ontology and epistemology, I know you've explored both of those areas. And the kind of conversations I ended up in took me into this glorious grey area of, when we think about what scientists say, we think of it as well, science has agreed that X, or there are two different studies, two different scientists, and they disagree about this. And actually, anyone with a PhD who's a professional researcher, an academic, would tell you anything. It's just degrees of confidence, of which there's often it's not very. we're never very confident about things. We're only trying to constantly add another building block to what people know already, just, as they say, stand on the shoulders of giants. So it's just a completely different way of thinking, and I found it completely mind-blowing in a wonderful way.
I love the way you encapsulate some of those learnings, because you were there for 4 years. I actually do. You may remember we met up for coffee with you in Cambridge shortly after you'd started, and you had the quite weird experience of we're having this really great in-depth conversation. You said, "I have to go. I've got to get back to my desk. I've got to keep working hours," and rather than being the freedom of being an entrepreneur. But listening to what you were just saying there it's this different and linked spin to almost the definition of science. I remember a lot of people were talking about, well, the scientists say this, the scientists say this. We all discovered scientists with COVID, right? And I said, yeah, but science is only the best theory we have so far. And the scientific method is to, I guess, in a hopefully convivial way, look to poke holes in people's theories. So what you were saying there from a research standpoint is it's landing for me as something to cogitate on, which is it's just degrees of confidence. And we can, it's linked but slightly different, and it's really interesting. It's just really interesting.
Yeah, it's a wonderful world to be part of, and it's a really humbling world. I thought it had the potential to be a humiliating world where everybody explained how not clever you were, and actually it's not that. It's a humbling world where you realize how little you know, but how exciting that is.
Wonderful. So when you went in, and you said it took 4 years overall, you had an idea of what you were going in there to research, to study, to come out with. Was what you came out with, how close to what you went in with as ideas was what you came out with as your thesis?
So
I might not be framing that right, sorry.
yeah. So all I went in with was questions.
Okay.
And really, you spend the first, I completed it in 3 years, and I spent the first year just exploring questions and trying to find a research question and a cluster of sub questions that I could spend the second year exploring and the third year bringing to some kind of conclusion. I went in with questions around how can we make better use of this precious resource we have, which is time in the workplace, specifically that which we invest in meetings. So meetings are this very high density, high intensity activity in which multiple people are ideally devoting 100% of their attention. And we use it quite frivolously, and few people are entirely satisfied with their meeting load and the quality of their meetings, or the experience that they have. And actually only a lot of people are relatively dissatisfied. So it's one of the less positive sides of their work. So that, I'm not saying for a moment that there aren't great meetings and that there aren't some really energizing meetings, but as an overall experience for most people, it's just about net negative. And I was a bit tired of reading how-to tips. Here's how to improve your meetings, 10 ways. And if we could kind of rattle off about 6 of them: have an agenda, start and finish on time, don't let people interrupt, stick to the agenda. And it's all about chairing and having a strong chair. And I just felt that was nowhere near good enough to match the kind of collaborative, energizing, productive, creative, synergistic experience we're trying to, outcome we're trying to get from meetings. And I guess before I went to Cambridge, I lived in your world, where we talk about everything from servant leadership, love in business, purpose, energy, way beyond tactics like starting and finishing on time. And then when I got to when I started my PhD, and of course the first thing you do, I was so naive, I didn't really realize this, the first thing you do is just read a lot of papers, like a lot of papers, in the hundreds. I probably read about 800 papers in my first year.
Wow.
300 of which were exclusively about meetings. And paper after paper after paper, I just couldn't believe what I was reading. So I felt there were some excellent papers, and particularly an excellent book, but the majority was fairly generalized key driver question analysis around, so a survey: what was the last meeting you went to, and how satisfied were you with the process, and how satisfied were you with the outcome, plus a load of things that you kind of say did or didn't happen. So did we start and finish on time, and did I have the opportunity to speak, and was there an agenda, and did we follow the agenda? And of course, the conclusion of all of those was it's helpful to have an agenda. We just go round the circle, complete the loop of the thing we already thought, because the things they were asking about were on that fairly limited list of tactics. So the answers they got came from that limited list of tactics. So that's not to say that it's not helpful to have an agenda, but I felt there was just a world of possibility beyond that. And we already have brought that sophistication to things like leadership, to team dynamics, to culture, but we were not applying it to meetings, both in the real world and in the academic scholarly world. We're treating meetings as these kind of standalone events. So it's a bit like saying, if I said to you, Tom, what makes a great conversation? And the first thing you'd be like, whoa, well, it depends what the conversation is. And the second thing you might say is, well, you don't just pluck a conversation out of the air. It's steeped and embedded in our previous relationship, what has happened to me this day, what the conversation's about. So I guess I'm taking a very long way to say it's a systems problem. So meetings are systems problems, and my research shows that. That's not to say other scholars didn't consider them that, they just didn't treat them as that in their study. They did a different kind of study. So I did a systems-based study and explored what's around the meeting, so what it's connected to, not just what happens, the tactics that happen within it. And that revealed quite a different picture in many ways. And I tried extremely hard. I worked very, very hard to keep my own thoughts and experiences as a practitioner out of my results. And of course, my voice is, of course, in my results and in my thesis. What I chose to listen to in interviews, what I attended to and what I didn't, it inevitably impacts the data I collected, let alone how I interpreted it. However, I did my very best at least to understand what my researcher voice was, my researcher footprint was within my study.
Well, that's fascinating, because when I was listening to you there, one of the first things that occurred to me was all of Kahneman and Tversky's work around heuristics and biases, and like how much confirmation bias there is if you do how do meetings work, were you happy with the meeting, did it finish, the old assumption is, and I just thought, what if you lift it up a whole lot and go, why do we have meetings in the first place, what are they designed to do? And then you just put it into much clearer terms of like, it's a systems issue, so what sits around it. So given that you then had, you had this very strong focus on being aware of your biases and looking to eliminate them as a researcher, so I could talk to you for hours to understand what did you learn and what was knowledge to you, and How did you know what we know, and how did you learn what you learned? But I'm also a little bit impatient and cognizant of not being able to talk for hours and keep within the creative constraint of a podcast. Let's fast forward a little bit. So you took the first year to go in with a bunch of questions, and really the one core you mentioned just one core question. I'm sure there were others. And then you just determined that it was to look at it from a systems approach. What did you come up with?
So my entire research question was something around what can we learn from taking a systems approach. So rather than say we need a systems approach and I'm going to take it and let's see what the result is. Really, I was saying, what happens if we take a systems approach? Is it useful? What do we learn? So I think we learn a few things. Firstly, we are in collaborative overload. That I didn't invent that. That's a thing. But my studies really back that up from a meetings point of view. So we have, as soon as we work on collaborative projects, we need really strong relationships. So trust, and we need enough trust to get the job done, even when it's difficult and even when the project or the work doesn't go well or we disagree. And building trust takes time. It takes face-to-face time, including meetings. It takes effort and energy, and we can only do so much of that. But of course, many of us work on multiple collaborative projects. So what do we do? Do we skip the trust part and just kind of transact on those? That doesn't go so well. Or do we invest in the trust part and do all that interacting and then end up doing our deep work outside? So the deep work being the uninterrupted focus. We need to do difficult things. Do we end up doing that in evenings, weekends? And if as I talk, I'm wondering if some of the listeners really recognize that, where there are all these meetings. It's very easy to say have fewer meetings, but actually we go to meetings because we're trying to get the job done. And what that means is that the rest of our work spills over. So my research shows that loud and clear, and it is a call to arms that we need to break meeting gridlock. So we do need to, we somehow need to put a constraint. And I love the idea that could be a creative constraint on meeting capacity, because at the moment there's no check and balance. You can dive into somebody else's time budget, stick a meeting in their diary, and there's not much they can do about it. They can turn it down, but we don't have to ask. We don't really have to ask for that time. It's kind of okay to use up other people's time. So I think we need to press the reset button on meeting load, i.e. how many meetings we're going to and the total time that we're taking. We also need to, my research shows that we need to stop thinking about the idea of running meetings or conducting them or calling them, which is all transacting, but we need to think about designing them and engaging people in them. So my data show a really clear extra step that gets missed around social contracting. So I'm not sure if any of you can recognize that thing where you arrive in a meeting, either you've no idea what's going to happen and why you're there, and you've just shown up because it's somebody you trust or somebody who's important who's invited us, or you think it's about one thing and it turns out to be about another. And whatever the social contract was in our head, it's been broken. So social contract being the agreement we have between us, we may not even know we have it, which is, it's not written down, but on which we're basing our expectations and our behavior. So the reason it's helpful to circulate an agenda in advance, we'll talk in a moment about how much I hate the word agenda, but right. The reason that people like that is so that they've got a picture in their head of what they're arriving at. They understand what we're trying to get to and what their role in it is. And we want that. Some people want that a lot, so it's much more neuro-inclusive to share expectations and share purpose, scope, and roles beforehand. But this social contracting piece in general gets missed out. So what I do now is show people how you can do that really, really simply with 4 or 5 elements to an email, for example, and a question at the end. but my research shows how radical that is in terms of having people arrive with a shared social contract in place that won't get broken.
When you put those 4 or 5, I'm not asking you to talk us through all of that, but feel free if you think it would be useful. What's different in doing it with your method that has come out of your research than the standard? You're meeting at this time. Here's the title. Here's the agenda, and here's what we're looking to get out of it.
Yeah. So normally what happens is you get a title, as you say, and that might be something like website meeting or catch-up meeting or Project X meeting. So you've no idea from that title what it's about. It's not a purpose-led title. And imagine you wouldn't pay £1,000 to go on a course called the X course. There's nothing driving you, even in the title. That's the first, and that's a crucial piece of real estate. It's the thing that sits in your diary. It's what goes in the subject of the email when it pings you the reminder. So there's a big cue there. So my method shows you how to use that title really well. It's a really basic step. The other thing we do in an agenda is we often just list the topics. So again, there's no direction, there's no outcome, there's no indication of what process we're going to use or what technique we're going to use to get to the outcome, should we know what it is. It's just a list of topics. So we're spending the first part of the meeting trying to sort of figure out what's going on and what we're trying to contribute, or we just plow down one route and realize only later that other people are going down a different route. So my method makes that really clear. So for example, including some kind of purpose statement in the invitation, including meeting questions. So a really easy way to frame up stages you want to go through is pose them as a question. Humans are problem-solving machines. Give us a question, we'll answer it. And we'll tell other people that they should answer it as well if they start going off track. And then I include my methods from scoping. So it's a few bullets on what we will do and a few bullets on what we won't do. And that gives you the opportunity to say right up front, these things are for another meeting. So again, people will start to self-moderate if you use them. And then some question or statement or something which is designed to engage people. Now, you might need to engage people far more than just sending them an email, but assuming you're emailing them an invitation, at the very, very, very least, include something that says, this is what I'm thinking of, what do you think? Or what would you add? Or what have I missed? The same as we would in many collaborative processes where we send people something saying, this is my starting point, what did I miss? So but we often don't do that in meeting invitations. So there are a few more ingredients, but that's the kind of thing. And it's so annoyingly obvious. There's nothing in that part that I think anybody would find particularly surprising. The reality is we usually don't do it. People who do it well are coaches, facilitators. We do it when we're running a workshop, when somebody's paying us to do it, but we don't just whip out those 4 or 5 mini bullets for everyday meetings, and we could.
Yes, it's like that great phrase when one of the biggest compliments any of us can be paid if you say something back to somebody after listening and they go, that seems so obvious now. And it's the operator on the now. So listening to you, that seems so obvious now. And it's like there's great simple learnings, but they've come out of deep research. So, I heard you say if I lift it up, it's also about care.
Yeah.
It's about caring about the value that can be provided from the meeting for the business or the organization, but it's also about caring for the people's time. You mentioned at the very beginning that it's a friction, using up that time. And I think you used words like it's a sort of dense, and there was another adjective. And it is quite stunning. When I've done work facilitating multi-day offsites for people, they pay for my time. But very rarely do they actually, and I make them consider it. I'm going, and back in the days when people were a bit less considerate of the amount of carbon footprint, you might fly 6 people in from around the world for 2 or 3 days. normally business class, etc. So there's an actual dollar cost, but that's not even the cost. The cost is their time.
Yeah.
That scarce resource. And
Yeah.
if they're in for 2 days with us, it's probably knocking them out for 5 working days.
Yeah.
In
And
which they do nothing of that. And it's like, let's consider that time. It's caring about, not looking, I mean, the flip from friction to lubricant. I don't know. It's, what would it take from, I don't know. I'm listening to you, and whether the concepts are high level or whether they're granular tips, they're making me think about how much care I put into designing meetings and engaging people. One of the key themes you said.
So time is half the story. Time is a non-refundable, non-renewable resource.
Mm-hmm.
And half of what I do is about making the best possible use of it. The other half is about diffusing the tribal forces we get in meetings.
Oh, okay.
So hundreds of thousands of years ago, it was crucial to stay safe in our tribe, to be useful to our tribe, and to not get eaten by a lion. So our conduct within a tribe was vital, and we've not lost that part of our brain. And under pressure at work, that's exactly where we go again. So we have a strong desire to be right, to be useful, to look clever, not stupid, to look productive, to look like we're on top of things, and that can lead to things like people being defensive or overly critical, or all kinds of kind of microaggressions, or the feeling of being micro-threatened in meetings. So the whole other piece of Fewer, Faster, Bolder, which is the work I do now, is helping people understand how to diffuse those, so to get really good pro-social behaviour. So we want people to be highly honest in meetings. That's how we get to what matters, to what the truth is. We want them to be highly respectful of each other, and we want them to have high care for the outcome. So to act in service of the outcome or the work. And the two overlap together. So there's nothing more triggering than feeling that your time has been wasted. So the two overlap, and many of the things we talked about in just one example, which is how do you put together a meeting invitation, cross over into that tribal space as well. And it's when you bring those two halves together, so you make the absolute best use of people's time, and you bring out their very pro-social, very collaborative, generative behaviours. That's where the magic happens.
So on that second part, because you did give us some tips on structuring a meeting and inviting people to a meeting, and I'm sitting here resembling this remark. I have offended different people in meetings, including your good self, at times, and it's a constant source of humility and learning for me to learn. I've learned so much about neurodiversity, for example, and how that impacts meetings. I had a guest called Lynn Pilkington come on, and she massively focuses on neurodiversity. And it's like, oh God, I've been doing meetings wrong. It's like, and feeling very bad about that, and actually like, how can I do it better? So what's sort of the pro-social side of it? And so we don't descend into silos and tribes and move into gang behavior is an element in psychology. What sort of simple tips could you give us which would probably seem obvious once you've told us?
Yeah, so the first is to, as the group leader or the meeting leader or the participant, is to model clean communication. So clean communication is high honesty, high respect, and in service of the work. So an example of how you might do that, and if I can just go back one step, if there is ever a scenario in which, let's say me, where I feel, did you use the word offended?
Yes.
Yeah, if me, you, anyone else feels offended in a meeting, we play a part ourselves in that. Clearly, it is a tribal behavior to feel micro-threatened, i.e. offended. The route out of that is clean communication. So if I want somebody to stop doing something in a meeting, like talking and talking and talking, for example, or talking about their agenda and not listening to anybody else's, that would be one good example, then I need to use clean communication. So imagine somebody's banging on about something, they've said it once, they've said it twice, they've brought it up again. What you want to say is, I've heard you, now shush. We can't say that in a meeting. So what we do is we use a bit of passive aggression. Instead, what we can do is use clean comms. So we can do a bit of validation. So we can say, I really get that that's a really important thing. So what I'm hearing you say is that ... and I agree that's important. You can do a bit of appreciation, and I'm really glad that you're bringing it to our attention because I know that's important. And then you can set a boundary. So that's in service of the work. Today, it's really important that we ... that we hear from everybody, or that we cover these other issues as well, or whatever it is that you've already set up. And this is how it all works together. Whatever you've already set up in your invitation. So you've already scoped it. You don't need to backtrack and kind of start slamming stable doors while horses bolt everywhere. You've already said, this is the thing that we need to do. These are the things that we won't do. And you hopefully already said it will be really important in this session that we hear from everybody, or that we consider a wide range of options. So all you need to do is validate, you understand, show that you understand what they've said, show your appreciation for them. So show your respect for the fact that they're bringing it up, and then you can set your boundary, and you're modeling that for everybody. So that then if anybody else feels any sense of frustration, they can also do the same and follow your lead and use your technique. So that would be one other tip.
Okay. I remember you having an event at the London Transport Museum. It must have been 5-6 years ago at least. And you had your whole presentation was on clean communications, and you'd done an e-booklet on it. I still have it. I hopefully have applied it and learned from it a lot. It's just so simple, isn't it? Once you apply that. I'm conscious of not overrunning our half hour by too much. And I'm in over 100 shows. What I've loved is that, as thematically, is that guests come on and they all have a business. They all have something through which they do their work. And they're normally sharing ideas which may be related, they may not be related, but they're sharing, and they're sharing stuff so that people can learn, etc. But they don't plug what they're doing. But in this case, I kind of want you to like plug what you're now doing, because you've come off this PhD, and we've not spoken for yonks, but you are now clearly very energized about putting it out in the world. So I'd love you, if you feel comfortable, to talk a little bit about what you're now doing and how people can access it.
Well, oh gosh, my goal is to change as many people's working lives as I can through meetings. I think we spend a lot of time at work in our lifetime. We spend a lot of time in meetings, and my great joy would be to make them so much better for so many people. And the ways I do that, so I work at organizational level, so helping organizations shift their meeting culture as a whole business, so impacting all meetings. Often I start in one area and work out. And if anybody was interested in doing that with me, then they could look at joining a cohort. So I run a cohort each year for a small number of companies that I work with, as a sort of almost like an action learning group. And it's a sort of an easy and affordable way to dip your toe in the water if you don't want to do a 6-figure change project just right now about meetings. The thing about meetings is it's in no one's budget. No one has a line item on their job description. It's not owned. So the cohort is a really nice way to make progress with peers. And I'm also launching an e-course for individual people who want to change their meetings and become a hugely emotionally mature and effective meeting leader. the idea being really to change the performance of the work, your team through meetings. And that's released on the 31st of January. And there is a pre-order option at the moment on my website. And I can send you the links to both of those. And I can also give an extra discount code for your listeners if you would like.
That would be lovely. Where do people find you online?
So I'm at fewerfasterbolder.com. I post most days on LinkedIn, Dr. Carrie Goucher.
That's it. I mean, you're easy to find. I endorse, not only endorse Carrie's brilliant mind, I want to also acknowledge you for sharing what you've learned about yourself on this process. And you're absolutely modeling. Over the last number of years, I've evolved my own simple heuristic for what it takes to be what I call an open leader. And it's to have these two characteristics of both being brave and hungry, which on their own could be old school, controlling and toxic, but they have to be, and that to be brave and hungry, to really want to drive towards something, but also to be open and humble. And you've totally modeled that on this call. And I guess if I introspect, the reason I asked you to plug what you're doing, right, is because you are so passionate about, and you just came out and said it, is what's your purpose in life around business. And, it's like when people have that energy, right, it's pretty irresistible. Right? So I just wanted to hear more about it. And so I do encourage our listeners to look up Dr. Carrie Goucher on LinkedIn, and or go to fewerfasterbolder.com and see what resonates for you. And I imagine for quite a number, they may be very interested in either your e-course or talking to you about other ways in which they can work with you. So it's been an absolute pleasure. And I always like to give my guests the final word. So what last words of wisdom does Dr. Carrie have for our audience?
I think the next step for us as for humanity is to figure out how to get out of collaborative overload.
Okay.
I don't know what that looks like. I think we've got steam coming out of our ears, and it's not stopping anytime soon. So I'm eyes wide open, ears pricked for how we navigate our way out of collaborative overload.
Wow. I'm going to leave you with the last word because that makes me think I could jump in with a bunch of stuff, but I won't say anything. It's been an absolute pleasure and a privilege to reconnect with you in this fashion and to give you space to share all of this. And we know that what comes next among those things is an e-course starting in January. So many thanks, Carrie.
Thank you so much, Tom.